Hej världen! Jag heter Zachary Milord. Hey world, it is I, Zachary Milord, and yet again another YouTube video. So, with today's video, as the title suggests, I want to talk about how languages get ranked, and then kind of how this ranking system is kind of bogus, and talk about what actually makes a language difficult or not. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So we are on this website, fsilanguagecourses.org. I'm not too familiar with this website, but in general, it just seems like has information about just like languages in general and why they are ranked the way they are. We're gonna not look into too many different things. We're only going to be looking at this ranking chart. So, essentially, the U.S. government itself has a sort of linguistic specialist organization, and this organization has decided how difficult languages are. This is of course, from the perspective of an English speaker. If an English speaker were to go out and learn a foreign language, how difficult that language would be. So let's look at the categories, what they have in the categories, and then go from there. So we start out with category 1, which they say takes 24 weeks to learn. And this is like, when I say 24 weeks to learn, just 24 to be proficient enough to get around. This isn't like you're really freaking amazing at the language. This is, you can get around, basically. So, in this chart, which there's one of these that stands out to not be on this map. They don't all have maps, by the way, but they've included languages like Afrikaans, Danish, Dutch, French, Italian, Norwegian, Portuguese, Romanian, Spanish, and Swedish. Afrikaans is not really on this map, but because Afrikaans would be in South Africa. I'll go over what these languages are, though. So Afrikaans is a language that, from my understanding, is basically if you took Dutch, a little bit of English, and then mix it in with some native African languages, and then you get Afrikaans. That's what that is. Danish is the language of Denmark. It's a North Germanic language, meaning it's just it's basically another term for saying it's a Scandinavian language. Danish, I'll get into some of these language groups, but not all of them. I'll speak on what I know. I think, yeah. Actually, I won't address it right now. What I'll do is I'll just go through what they put, and then as I come back, I'll explain why I think some of this is bogus. Then there's Dutch. Dutch is a West Germanic language and is actually very, it's the language of the Netherlands, or as we call it, Holland. It's actually technically the Netherlands. Holland is only a specific region of the Netherlands, so you should just call it the Netherlands, but without further ado, yeah. The language they speak is Dutch. Dutch is very similar to English, as it is sort of made up from the same groups that make the English people. But English underwent a lot of change because of its unique geography and history. French. French is obviously the language of the French in France. This would be a Romance language, though a very highly Germanic Romance language, because it was a Germanic territory, but then with the Roman Empire. It kind of got put under control and very highly Romanized. So there's a lot of Latin influence there. So it became a Romance language. Italian is obviously the language of Italy. Very obviously a Romance language, as that is the heart of the Roman Empire. Norwegian is the language of, who would have guessed, Norway. It is another one of those North Germanic languages, or a Scandinavian language. But yeah, Portuguese is, well, the language of Portugal. Um, it's another one of those, Romance languages. I will say, though, what is unique, though, is the languages of the Iberian Peninsula have quite a bit of Arabic influence compared to the rest of the languages. Spanish more so than Portuguese, but there's definitely still some influence there. Romanian is the language of Romania. This is the only Slavic sort of country. Well, Slavic or Balkan, I'll let you choose which one it belongs to. But it's the only language out here that is related to all this. And it's a Romance language, but has high sort of Eastern European vocabulary influence. Spanish is the language of Spain, another Romance language, and as mentioned, very unique for being on the Iberian Peninsula. They had a lot of Arabic influence. Lastly, Swedish is the language of Sweden, another North Germanic language or Scandinavian language. And yeah, next up we got category 2, which is just German, which they put at taking 30 weeks to learn. Now, the reason why they've kind of given it its own category is that while it is a West Germanic language and thus very, very similar to English, they have both a complicated gender system and cases. To explain, cases is basically each of the nouns can take different forms depending on the grammatical usage. So, for example, when book is the subject or the thing doing an action, it'll be one way. When it's an object or something being affected, it'll take another form. When you're giving something to the book then receives a different form. And if something belongs to the book then has yet another form. So, yeah, that makes it a little difficult. And when we keep in mind that, and that's how German works, they have 4 cases. But we have to keep in mind not only does it have different forms for the singular with that, but with the plural. So things get very, very tricky very quickly. But yeah, that's why that's there. Category 3, they say will take 36 weeks to learn, which they've included Indonesian, which is the language of Indonesia, Malaysian, which is the language of Malay, and Swahili, which is the language of the Swahili coast. The reason why these are in category 3 is that, yet quite different from English when it comes to vocab and stuff like this and grammar. All these use the Roman alphabet or the ABCs, and the grammar itself is actually quite simple for a lot of these, and the pronunciation too. So they kind of get this kind of easy pass, if that makes sense. Next up we have category 4, which is basically most other languages. I don't know if I really want to read all these, but we'll go ahead. Albanian, the language of Albania. Amharic is a Middle Eastern language, I'm pretty sure. Armenian, I'm not as sure. Could be Balkan, could be Middle Eastern, I'm not too sure. Azerbaijani, same case as this, I'm not too sure. Bengali is a Indian language, meaning India. Bosnian is a Balkan language. Bulgarian is a... I don't know if this would be Eastern European or Middle. You choose. Burmese is the language of Burma, now called Myanmar, or it's a Southern Asian language. Croatian is a Balkan language that's very Slavic, if I remember right. Czech is a Slavic language. Estonian is a Baltic language, not to be mixed up with Balkan. Finnish is also kind of a Baltic language, but it's kind of its own thing. It's a Uralic language. I don't know why they put Finnish twice, but they did. Georgian is a very unique language because it is one of the very few languages that belongs only to itself. It's not really related to anything, and they have their own unique weird script. I say weird, I mean cool. But yeah. Greek, we all know Greek. Greek is also kind of its own thing, but it has been so influential to so many languages that it kind of gets that instant relatability because like of how influential it was. Hebrew is the language of Israel, and the language of the Jews. I do find it interesting that they made it a category 4, as it is. Sorry about that, I accidentally clicked a button. As I was saying though, I find it interesting that Hebrew is a category 4, not a category 5, as it is very, very related to Arabic. But Arabic gets counted as a category 5. So I do wonder what made them to choose to let it be a category 4. Hindi is one of the main languages of India. Hungarian is the language of Hungary. Icelandic is the language of Iceland. It is a North Germanic language, so by that you would think it would be in the first category, but they actually have a case system and a fairly complicated pronunciation system, so that's why it is where it is. Khmer is a Southern Asian language, same with Lao. Latvian would be the language of Latvia, but to be honest, I don't know where Latvia is on the map. It sounds like it might be a... Is it a Balkan thing? Hold up. I'm gonna have to Google this. Latvia. Okay, it's a Baltic language. So, Latvia is apparently part of the Baltics. I'm sorry, Latvia, I didn't know who you were, but now I do. Lithuanian is also a Baltic language, this I know. Macedonian is very related to Greek. So yeah. I don't know why they have Lithuanian twice. Wait, they actually have Lithuanian and Macedonian twice. I don't know what's up there. But anyway, Mongolian is a very complicated language, mainly because of script issues. I mean, pronunciation grammar is also very hard, but they started out with their own script, but their own script was so hard that the Chinese try to make them use their script to write out their stuff, but we've seen how that works with other Asian languages. It doesn't work out too well. And then so they just kept their own script. But then at some point the Russians came in and were like, yo, look, you can use our script. And so that's what they use today, is the Cyrillic script. But that comes with its own issues, as the Cyrillic script doesn't perfectly encompass all their sounds. So, difficult things. Anyway, Nepali. Nepali would be the language of Nepal. Now, the interesting with Nepali is it's kind of in this interesting space where it is kind of in between China and India. There's some kind of Chinese things going on, some kind of Indian things going on with it. It's an interesting language. Pashto, if I remember right, kind of like Persian, is kind of a Middle Eastern language with high Arabic influence. If I'm kind of slightly wrong, please don't roast me. I don't know every language, but I know a little bit about things I've heard about. Correct me if I'm wrong, though. Polish is a Slavic language, though, unlike most Slavic languages, not only does it have very impossible pronunciation, it also has probably the worst spelling system ever because instead of just being smart and using the Cyrillic alphabet, which perfectly encompasses their language, they decided to use the Roman alphabet to connect with the West more. So, L to you Poles. That's a joke. I like you, but I don't like that choice. Anyway, Russian. Russian is obviously from Russia. It's a Slavic language. It uses Cyrillic alphabet, all that. And yeah. Serbian is a Balkan language that, and this applies to a lot of the Balkan languages, they have high Slavic influence. I don't remember if this is one of the ones that is basically a Slavic language or not, but there's influence there. Sinhala, I've heard this term before. I don't know much about this as a language, though. Could be an African language, could be a Middle Eastern language. I don't really know. But moving on. Slovak and Slovenian, some more Slavic languages. Tagalog is the language of the Philippines. Thai is the language of Thailand. Turkish is the language of Turkey. Ukrainian is the language of Ukraine. Ukrainian is very related to Russian. They are both Slavic languages and use Cyrillic alphabet, which really helps. But out of the Slavic languages, like they're very, very closely related. Urdu is another one of those sort of India-related languages. If I remember right, it's in Pakistan that Urdu is spoken. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's where it's spoken. But yeah, Uzbek is spoken in Uzbekistan and has a very similar situation as Mongolian, where the Russians came in and gave them their script. But not everything works out all the time. Vietnamese is the language of Vietnam, so it's a Southern Asian language. Correct me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, but Xhosa is an African language, and so is Zulu. So, again, that's all the category 4, which they say take 44 weeks. Basically, the big thing is complicated grammars, complicated writing systems, complicated things. That's basically why they put this here. Lastly, but not leastly, category 5, which they say takes 88 weeks to learn, is basically Arabic and then the major Asian languages, so Japanese, Korean, and both forms of Chinese, the Cantonese and Mandarin. So, for Arabic, it's the script really. That's one of the big things is the script. So, from my understanding is they basically write out things with consonants, and that's basically it. So, for example, camel in Arabic I know is gamal, and they would literally spell it GML. That's right, GML. And you're supposed to understand that it's gamal. Now, you might have someone saying, actually, technically, they do have a way to write the A. This is true. They do write the A in between with dots, if you're writing correctly. But Arabic speakers already know their words, so most of the time they don't even include the dots, so they're just going to write GML. And so us as Westerners, we're just supposed to understand that it's Gamal and not Gimil or Gamel or Gamil. Like, heck if I know, I'm a Westerner. But anyway, that's how they write. Also, I don't know too much about their grammar, but I have heard it is really difficult. Really difficult for Westerners to grasp. But yeah. And then with the Asian languages, it's pretty simple. The grammar is quite different. It's difficult in some ways, but also easier in others. And then the major elephant in the room is really just the kanji characters, which affect mainly the Chinese and Japanese, but to some extent the Korean. So, we have gone through this, right? Here's my thoughts. This isn't necessarily a ranking of how difficult a language is to learn. This is more or less a ranking of how similar a language is to yours. So, like, all these languages are very related to English. Very, very extremely related. This is where kinda gets a little further out. Then we get further out there, then further out there, and then complete opposite, pretty much, more or less. But yeah. Um, I want to go over now, though, my thoughts. So, with these category ones, I've actually had quite a lot more trouble learning these languages than I've had learning these languages. I could speak Japanese and Korean pretty good. I've dabbled with some Chinese. I've not really learned Arabic. Arabic, I think, is fairly placed. Um, but with Japanese, Korean, and Chinese, especially the Japanese and Korean, like, I think it's pretty straightforward. Um, like, my thing with these languages, excluding the Scandinavian ones, is the verbs. Too many irregular verbs. There's a conjugation for every subject tense, really. And to make matters worse, the gender thing, that's true. But then also, unlike English, where we have past and present tense, and then we use an auxiliary verb to make the future. So, like, I will do something. Like, you're not directly affecting do, you're adding will in there to make it something that will happen. I can't escape using will, but, like, it's a future thing. Like, you're gonna do something, but later. Anyway, so with the specifically the Romance languages, they actually have an actual future tense. I think adding that in is an extra level of difficulty, personally, and that especially like French and Spanish and some of these, they get very, very picky about how you pronounce things, and I think that can be a little troublesome. German, I actually think it is pretty difficult to learn. I'll give it that. Like the Romance languages, but I do think in some ways, at least for me, where I speak English and German is related to English, I find German easier to learn. Do with that what you will, but yeah. I haven't really dabbled too much with these languages, but I will say I've looked a little bit into them, and they do seem pretty easy to learn. The grammar is pretty straightforward. The pronunciation is pretty straightforward. And all that, so it's got a thumbs up for me. Now, I can't really go over everything here, but I would say anything Slavic is pretty difficult. Anything Southern Asian is pretty difficult. And with the Southern Asian languages, a little bit the grammar, but more so the pronunciation. They've just got some sounds that we don't really make in Western languages. So, yeah. What else? I do think Hebrew should be more firmly placed with Arabic. Um, trying to look at the other types of Icelandic. I think could be placed in an easier spot. It's somewhere around German. But like a little harder. Um, sorry. Finnish could also be placed a lot higher. The hard thing with Finnish is the cases, really. Like German, they have cases, but they have a whole whopping 14 of them. So that itself is difficult. But the pronunciation, though, is pretty easy. And everything else, otherwise, is fairly easy. Besides that, I don't got too much to add in. So, out of the Scandinavian languages, this is the last thing I'll add in. I do think Danish, out of the Scandinavian languages, is the hardest. It's not that the grammar or anything is that much more crazy, but that pronunciation is. They got some weird, wacky pronunciation going on here. So I think that is a little difficult. But now I want to go over what truly makes a language difficult to learn. Because I said this is more of a ranking of how different a language is. So, first off, the simplicity of the grammar. How many different grammar aspects do I have to learn and to what depth? Like, for example, do I have to, is a noun just left by itself, or does it have an article like the or a an? Because that sort of thing can get very complicated really fast. Is there a gender concept there? How many gender concepts are there? Because the more we have there, the more difficult it gets. How about verbs? How many tenses are there? And then in addition to tenses, how many moods are there? Because this is another thing, is languages can sometimes have moods as an inflector with the verbs. And if it does have this, how complicated have we made that with conjugation? Also, and this is going with the Asian languages, if it doesn't necessarily have a conjugation per person sort of thing, how does it have a way does it? And in the case of Asian languages, it's often by honorifics. Where do you stand in society compared to the person you're talking to? Let's see, what else? The sounds of the language, the writing system of the language. But, sorry, I don't think that. I don't think necessarily, for example, people would like to dog on Chinese characters. I don't think Chinese characters are necessarily the hardest thing. As I said, I think Arabic rivals it. Yes, the writing itself is fairly easy, the strokes and everything, but where you're supposed to see GML and think Gamal rather than any other possible sound baffles me. Also, there are some other writing systems that I've seen a little bit of that do seem not as self-explanatory and a little confusing. Like, maybe it's just a resource thing, but I remember seeing Burmese, how it's written, and I was a little lost. Maybe I just need to touch up on it and see some more, but I was honestly a little lost. I think another thing too is just how into the language you are in the first place. Because, like, if you're learning for business or because people say it's a good idea, yeah, you're probably not gonna have as much of an easy time because you don't really care about it. But if you actually want to learn the language, you're gonna find a way to have fun with it, and you're gonna learn a lot. But yeah, I think there's a lot of factors that really go into it, and that we could try to do stuff like this that's very objective, but sometimes we just need to be subjective. Each person is going to find certain languages easier or harder than them. And that's really comes down to, like, I would take a Japanese class over any Spanish class. I am learning Spanish. This is something I'm doing. But dang, is Spanish kicking my butt. Uh, I just Romance languages and I don't click that much. Besides Portuguese. Portuguese for some reason clicks. I don't know why. But Portuguese clicks a lot more. Yeah. I don't know that I have too much more that I can add. So I think we'll leave it here. Essentially, you decide how difficult it is. You take this journey. Learn the language that you want to learn. Hoorah. But yeah, if you like this video, give it a like, subscribe, share with friends and family that may be interested in this content, and yeah, we'll see you in the next video, and until then, hey doodles.